In part 3 of What If Amuro Got the Alex Gundam, we looked at how things would change if we went with the Shards deleted affair continuity, but it seems that most people, me included, felt that it would be the most interesting to continue our story with Axis returning in full force. Or in other words, this video picks up where part 2 left off. So if you need a refresher, there's a link on screen and down below. After a long journey, Axis would finally return to the Earth sphere on October the 12th, Universal Century 0087. For the leaders of the devastated A.E.U.G and other anti-Federation groups, this was their final chance to oppose the now seemingly undefeatable Titans. Negotiations quickly began, with Wong Lee serving as the main representative for both the Rebels and Anaheim Electronics. In order to tip the scale in their favor, and also to ensure continued revenue to his company from war, Wong was ready to give Axis Zeon a lot in return for their alliance. And without Char to ruin this mutually beneficial deal, Axis would ally themselves with to the A.E.U.G and her allies. For the A.E.U.G, this meant that they would now play a mostly subordinate role to the much more powerful Axis. They were simply in no position to decline. However, this didn't mean that all A.E.U.G members were happy with this situation. Worse yet, it fractured the already delicate makeup of the organization even more. Many of the former Zeon members were quite content to serve under Axis Zeon, who showed themselves as a continuation from the Principality of Zeon. But for the same reason, this sowed discontent with many of the Earth Federation and Titans defectors who had joined the A.E.U.G with the goal of just stopping the Titans. But again, many had no other choice but to bide their time and to choose the, at the moment, lesser of two evils. That being said, it cannot be ruled out that some of the more disillusioned ships left to become pirates or even joined the Titans due to their experience with Zeon from the 1-year war. For Axis then, the most important thing was the technological knowledge they could acquire from their new friends. Having been isolated for years, their mobile suit technology had gone their own way, and they would greatly benefit from new tech. Another problem that could be solved with the help of Anaheim Electronics were their lacking production facilities. All of this would greatly benefit Axis, as they could quickly upgrade their existing Gaza Cs to the newly dubbed Gaza C+, a variant that incorporated a stronger transformation mechanism inspired by that of the Methus, and also had some other minor upgrades. Visually, the unit remained largely the same, but it would now require much less maintenance, and it was also much more versatile in combat, thanks to the fact that the pilot no longer had to worry about the transformation mechanism destroying their mobile suit. And all that Axis had to do for this was to remember who helped them with this. Their first action would be the liberation of Side 3, a mostly symbolic battle consisting of the main Axis ships aided by some A.E.U.G vessels mopping up whatever few ships decided to resist. But meanwhile, the Titans weren't sitting by idly either. Determined to crush the final symbol of Spacenoid resistance, Jamatov turned Konpei Island into a Titan's base and began to move their recently completed colony laser to it. And before long, the Second Battle of Solomon, or the First Battle of Konpei Island, would begin, turning the Federal Civil War into a full-blown war. For Axis, the plan was simple. They would divide their forces in two and execute a pincer attack on Konpei Island. One group would consist mostly of A.E.U.G and older Axis ships, whereas the other group was their main force. According to the plan, both groups were of equal strength and were to attack Konpei Island at the same time. However, due to unforeseen circumstances, the main force would be delayed and only enter the battlefield after the other group had already been targeted by the colony laser. For this operation to succeed, Axis High Command had kept quiet about the colony laser and dismissed any rumors about it as unfounded scaremongering. On the Titans' side, the mood was much lighter, and throughout the fleet, there was a feeling that the war would be over by Christmas. The Axis fleet would be crushed by the colony laser, they'd pick off whatever remained, and then they could simply steamroll Axis into submission. But not all was well. Jomitov still had a feeling that Scirocco was up to something, so he entrusted the defense of the colony laser to ships and troops he knew were 100% faithful, including the Dogo's gear under the command of Basque Ohm. Even if Scirocco were to try something, there was no way he could jeopardize the colony laser. Instead, he and his fleet were assigned as the attack force that would mop up the Axis stragglers. Jomitov was so sure of the success of this operation that he would personally be on the bridge of the Dogo's gear to witness the final death throes of Axis. And on the 7th of December, Universal Century 0087, the battle would begin when the first Axis fleet entered Konpei's airspace and was targeted by the colony laser. Jomitov smiled as it fired on the Axis fleet, but his smile would soon disappear. The output of the laser had been much lower than expected, and it also took out significantly less of the Axis fleet. Shortly thereafter, reports of malfunctions on the colony laser began flooding in. On the bridge of the Jupiters, on the other hand, Scirocco's smile never left his face as he ordered all ships under his command to immediately engage the Axis fleet he knew to be a decoy. And for good measure, he also ordered them to begin spreading Minovsky particles at combat density. And then while Scirocco was off fighting the decoy fleet, the colony laser inexplicably exploded, causing severe damage to Jomitov's fleet, who then had to put up a desperate defense against Axis's main fleet. Their messages to Scirocco's fleet to return and relieve them never made it past the Minovsky particles, and by the time that Scirocco's fleet did return, all of the defenders had tragically and heroically died in combat. Or at least, that was what was stated in Scirocco's report on the battle. The same report also claimed that the colony laser's explosion was because of an Axis Special Forces team that had been able to infiltrate due to lack security and then sabotaged it. But there were also persistent rumors that soldiers loyal to Scirocco had something to do with it. Whatever the case may be, after witnessing the destruction of their main fleet, Scirocco declared himself as a successor to Jomitov and took control not just of this battle, but of all of the Titans. He then ordered all ships to withdraw, and their retreat went so orderly that it almost seemed as if it had been planned from the start. There was only one final hurdle to overcome for Scirocco. In the aftermath of the battle, the Federation Assembly, which still held many politicians loyal to Jomitov, was unconvinced by Scirocco's report and wanted to launch their own investigation before recognizing him as the new leader of the Titans. Scirocco then used this as proof that the bureaucracy of the Federation was woefully inefficient and incapable of dealing with the situation at hand. Rather than focusing on fighting Axis, the obvious threat in this situation, they would rather launch pointless investigations that would take up precious time. So in response, Scirocco declared martial law and staged a coup on the Federation government. All of this was of course done under the guise of protecting the Federation and all of its citizens. His following move then would serve to increase his popularity with the many space noids of the Federation. The Federation government would now be moved to space, more specifically, Luna 2, a location that was beneficial to Scirocco for a number of reasons. By moving the government to space, he showed the Space Noids his commitment to move the Federation away from its Earth-centric policies, and by picking a prominent Federation base as opposed to a Titan stronghold, he could keep up appearances that he wasn't trying to usurp all of the power for himself. However, in reality, Luna 2 was located far away from the main action, and the government there would fulfill little more than a ceremonious role, with all of the real shots being called by Scirocco himself. And following a major propaganda campaign, Scirocco's grip on the colonies was quickly tightening. This campaign also included trials against high-ranking Titans officers for the previously committed atrocities against the colonies. But conveniently enough, these were all officers suspected of still being loyal to Jamatov. One major remaining headache was the Peasant asteroid base. This was where the pro-Earthnoid Supremacy Instructor Corps was stationed, so to prevent this situation from escalating any further, Sirocco sent out a task force to quickly deal with them. And the flagship of this fleet was one of the Titans' longest serving and most decorated ships, the Al-Giza. On Earth though, things took a confusing turn for the worst, with many base commanders unsure of whether to support or oppose Sirocco's sudden coup. For the time being, Sirocco contented himself with securing the Titans' main Earthside base on Mount Kilimanjaro. With its position high above sea level, it wasn't just a perfect vantage point making attacks difficult from the ground, but it was also the perfect symbol for the Titans' strength on Earth. However, yet another member of the Titans thought that this confusion was the perfect time to gain control over the organization. Using the fame he'd acquired as an ace pilot with his Gundam Mark II, Gihren Mesa became a rallying point for all of those on Earth who were determined to fight against Scirocco and his pro-Space Noid agenda. And with a team of Gundams as their main machines, they were able to get some good PR amongst the people still living on Earth. Back in space then, Axis was unaware of the split within the Titans for the time being, and went ahead with Operation Reconquista and Operation British 2. The target of the former was the recapture of Granada, and the latter was to be a repeat of Operation British. But those operations will be the starting point of the next part of this series. For those who were worried that the Titans were going to have it easy with a weakened A.E.U.G, fear no longer. And with Scirocco now leading them, we're seeing some pretty big differences, so be sure to stay tuned for part 5. As always, a big thank you to the Patreon supporters. I hope everyone watching has a great day, and I'll see you all next time.